When the project manager is being appointed, they would be consulted. Makes sense that somebody would let them know. Hey team, I'm Stuart Taylor from Influential PMO and I'm here to support the project community. In a recent video I talked about roles and responsibilities and the importance of identifying who's responsible and who's accountable for what and tracking that through a Raci document. And in that video I also offered to show you how to make a basic Raci, and I live up to my promises, so here I am today to show you how to make a basic Raci using Excel. So here we are in Excel, and this is the tool we're going to use to make our Raci. You can do this using tables in Word or PowerPoint, but because these documents can sometimes run on quite a way, depending on how much detail you choose to put into it, I personally think that using Excel is much better. And if you need to present it in other tools such as PowerPoint or Word, you can always copy and paste the tables out. That's fine. Hey, just a reminder, this isn't a sermon, this is a practical session. Fire up your Excel and join in. So the first thing we're going to do is put a key up here for the poor people who haven't a clue what we're talking about when we mention Racis. So we're going to have to put a little bit more detail than that though. Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. What's responsible? Okay, let's keep it simple for the people who haven't come from a project background. Responsible is basically whoever is doing the task. Accountable is whoever owns the task. Again, this is not best practice, dictionary definitions. This is just something that's usable for your wider community, for your stakeholders who see this. Consulted is, and the difference between consulted and informed on this, and people tend to get a little confused on this. Informed is very much a one-way broadcast. I'm telling you something, you're informed. But if we have a two-way dialogue on something, then you're being consulted. You're giving opinions and feedback, and what I choose to do with that is, down to me. But as long as you're actually engaged in a two-way dialogue, then you're being consulted. So an easy way to put this is two-way discussion about the task. And I'm writing the task on here. More precisely, sometimes you might want to put the deliverable or the output, but that's fine. One-way discussion, that would be informed. So I guess really you could say that broadcast is fine, because sometimes these people just get an email notification or a newsletter or something, then they're informed. So the next thing we do is we start to put the table together for the Raci. And the first part of that is the actual task or deliverable. And I'm just going to extend that column by dragging the column there. And along here, we're going to start to list the key roles that are involved in the tasks and deliverables that are going to be listed on here. And I'm doing this for a very generic project. This is intended to be very transferable. So the tasks that I'm going to put are going to be very, very high level. And for your work, you'll need to dig in a little deeper. At this point, I'm going to start putting in some key roles for the Raci, and they're very generic. This is a very generic Raci because I don't know the nature of your projects, and I don't know the nature of your environment either. So I'm going to try and keep it as generic and simple as possible, and hopefully you'll be able to transfer it across to meet your needs. But here's an offer. If you find that this is actually too generic and it doesn't quite match with your needs and you need a little bit of help, give me a call. My details are in the description, so let me know and I'll be happy to help you. Okay, so we got the task on here, and the first role we're going to put on is the project manager. I'm just going to highlight these columns along here as well and just widen them all a little bit so I've got a little bit more space. Now, not every project, but many projects will have a business analyst. And we can put them down on there. And most projects as well will have some sort of a delivery team. And that will be whoever is actually building or creating the outputs that come from the project. And that varies so much from project to project. It could be coders, developers, it could be actual physical builders, bricklayers, people planting trees. It depends on your project. So for the purpose of being very generic, I'm just going to put delivery team. That delivery team also includes QAs as well, but if you've got an awful lot of testing going on, you might want to separate testers and QAs and that sort of category of experts later on in the Raci. But for right now, I'm just grouping everyone who's involved in the build all into delivery team. The next person I'm going to put on here is the sponsor. And they're a very important person on here. And they're going to have an awful lot of letters against their name. They don't think so, they don't think they should, but they're wrong. They will, and they should, and they must. The next is a group of people called the steering committee or project board. This is the group of people that in more mature environments you would go to have decisions made around the project. It's there to provide that level of control to make sure that the project's doing the right things. It's there to provide scrutiny, and it's also there to provide assurance to the rest of the organization that there are eyes on this project. It is likely to deliver the benefits that are being predicted. So I'm just going to, I don't like the fact that it's overrunning on that, so I'm going to go to home and press wrap text, and now it's wrapped itself all into that cell. And the next one on the list I'm going to put is users. And whether it's a collective group of users or a representative of the users, it's important to have users reflected on your Raci somewhere. A representative of the users is most likely going to be on the steering committee. So if that's the case, then the users in this case is just whoever's receiving the end product and whoever's going to be using it once the project has ended. And I always put these on lastly, vendors. So vendors, suppliers, anyone who's external who is providing something to enable this project to go ahead. And they'll typically work closely with the delivery team. Or in some occasions, they might even replace the delivery team. It might be an external delivery team, and you might need to adjust your Raci accordingly. Now I'm going to do a little bit of finessing here, and forgive me if you think this is being a little overly indulgent, but I'm going to highlight these cells, merge and center, and I'm going to highlight these cells, merge and center. And now I'm going to highlight this whole area and put all borders on, so it starts to look more like a table. And the reason why I've put this up here is so I can mark this as the project team, this one as the business, and this as external. And this is a little habit I got myself into. I always do this. I consider it helpful for identifying that these are the people here who will work on the project on a more day-to-day basis. These are people whose engagement will be somewhat less, but important and representative of the business. And these people are external and a separate cohort entirely. Just so you know, I tend to do this little bit of finessing whenever I'm creating any kind of a document. The reason being, firstly, I don't know when somebody's going to walk along and say that they want a copy of it and it's got to suddenly be published. And I don't want to spend time finessing it later on. Secondly, it only takes a short amount of time to do this, and it makes you feel as though you're closer to a completed document as you're working on it. I think sometimes it's very easy to just get so focused in the data that what ends up happening is you lose track of the fact that this is going to be used by other people, and it's not just going to sit on your record. So I always like my work to look as though it's ready to be shared, and I try to do that as a kind of a constant step as I'm creating content. So that's just me, and I personally think it's a good habit. So that's a recommendation. It's up to you whether you choose to take it or not. Okay, we're going to start putting some basic tasks and deliverables on here, which hopefully are constant for most projects. But again, this is not intended to be everything. This is just a very basic Raci. As you can see, it's a very basic team, and we're going to put very basic tasks. So things like create business case, things like appoint project manager. It's going to widen the columns again by dragging there. Appoint steering committee. Create PID. Create RAID. So the RAID is where the project manager will be storing risks, issues, assumptions, dependencies. Okay, so these are all very initiation stage type tasks. So we might have a end of initiation stage gate review, and then we'd move on into things like create plan, gather requirements, create design, define solution, engage vendors. I don't know if you can see, but I'm now starting to lose track of what's at the top of the page. So if we roll back up to the top of the page and highlight the row underneath the headings there, go to view and press freeze panes, and then click freeze panes. And now we preserve the top of the page so we can always see it. Oh, I completely forgot. Oh no, there's another responsibility I've got to add. It's on you. You're responsible for pressing the like button. Go on, press it. Okay, so when it comes to your project, I haven't got a clue what it is that you're building or how you're building it, whether you've got, as I said, coders, builders, people planting trees. I don't know, who knows? Who knows what kind of project you're working on? So I'm just gonna write here, build outputs. And it's up to you to maybe break build outputs down into the various subtasks and deliverables in order for you to be satisfied that you've done that. You might have multiple releases that you're going to do, so you might want to include that. I would say as well, test outputs is important too. And I don't want to have a lynch mob of agile people at the door. I am happy that you can build and test at the same time. I'm just listing them as separate tasks and deliverables because in some cases you may have different people doing them, and that might involve having more roles listed on here than we currently use. But I'm not making a judgment, so put the pitchforks away. You're going to communicate the change Maybe somebody in the delivery team will be doing that, but you're going to have to let people know that a change is coming. You might need to train users. At some point you'd have a go live decision. What you should do, you can't just decide yourself as project manager that you're going to go live. So it's a good idea to really get other people involved in that. And assuming everything's gone well, you'll do a handover to BAU where you hand over the outputs of the project and say, here you go. You know what, before I actually went into the build outputs, I really should have, I'm going to add a line there by selecting the row and clicking insert, because what I didn't do was put an end of planning stage gate review. And what made me remember that? Because we're now maybe at the end of build stage gate review. Now we're getting to the last stage on this format, and the reason I've done it in this way with, say, an initiation, a planning, a building, and then a closure stage is because in the more mature environments that I've worked in, they tended to favor this 4 stages approach. But if it's you deciding your stages, and if there's no internal guidance on how many stages to have, you can have as many or as few as you need in order to do the job effectively. So you can have a separate stage for planning, one for design, one for building, so on, implementing, testing, deployment. You know, you can break it up into so many stages if that enables you to have an appropriate level of control and confidence in the delivery. Okay, so we're nearly at the end here. As part of closure, the most important document that comes out of that is the project closure report. Keep doing typos because you're watching. Lessons learned log completed. You should have been doing lessons learned throughout the whole project. Just saying. Open risks and issues closed or transferred. Gotta widen that column again. And then you need to release the team. And we could do with just a couple more lines there. And I guess now we go to the end of closure stage gate review. I've been referring to stages through this. What you can do is have a column that actually says stage and tag each of those items that are on there as a stage, so it's easy for you to sort if you need to. Just an idea if you get into having large numbers of tasks and deliverables on there. Okay, now we're going to start putting the Raci tags on. This is the part where it gets interesting. Okay, we're going to make a basic assumption here. And you know what? Come at me if you think I'm wrong on this. Firstly, we're going to center everything on here. And for sponsor, I'm going to say they're accountable. And in most cases, project managers are going to be responsible, but I'm putting sponsor as accountable for everything to begin with, at least. And that gets changed as far as I'm concerned on a case-by-case basis. Now, it's not until this point that we actually have a project manager assigned. So the project manager, I would say, can only really start to be responsible from create the PID on here. So this may not run in entirely chronological order either, so you know, don't worry too much about that. You can sort yours into the order of your project plan as you go. But these items here probably would happen before the project manager is appointed, certainly that one. And for those items, you can only have one person who's accountable. but you can have a person who's accountable and responsible at the same time. So in this case, right in the business case, the sponsor is accountable and responsible unless they delegate the responsibility to somebody else. It could be that there's a team of people who write business cases in your organization, maybe people like business partners, or maybe there's a pool of project managers, and when somebody's got capacity, they get put onto the task of writing business cases. Appoint the project manager, that's down to the sponsor, and appoint the steering committee, also that is the sponsor. When the project manager is being appointed, they would be consulted. Makes sense that somebody would let them know. I don't think they would just be informed, even if they were from a pool of project managers and it's their job to go and do whatever projects that business happens to have running at the time. Even if that was the case, somebody would have a two-way communication with them. They might not be able to refuse, but they might have questions, so it's two-way, it's consulting. Similar thing for the steering committee, they would be consulted on that as well. There is another activity we can add in here, which would take place after the project manager's been appointed and somewhere perhaps before we start creating the plan. And that is to start building out the project team. And that would include appointing people like the business analyst, the delivery team, and anybody else that's involved. So just keep that in mind. You might want to put a line in for that somewhere depending on where in your organization that takes place. I mean, in some places they get appointed at the same time as the project manager, and that's not entirely unusual, but you know, everywhere's different. Okay, I would say for creating the PID that the business analyst would be consulted, and so would the delivery team. I think the steering committee would be consulted. Users, probably not so much. It depends on the place. Vendors, if you've already got a vendor lined up, then yes, it would make sense to engage with them, either informing them or consulting them. But I'm taking the view here that on this particular project, we're figuring out what it is we want to do first, and then engaging vendors would come later. But sometimes the reality is a vendor's already selected, the technology is already selected, and you know, your project is just a case of implementing it, in which case you already know who your vendors are. So you'd have them on much earlier and you'd start engaging with them much earlier. But then you'd probably also have them on the steering committee, and that might cover that engagement. In terms of the RAID, it's a good idea to continue to consult the people in your team, your business analyst and your delivery team, and your steering committee. Well, the steering committee would be more interested when it gets to the stage gate. There might be a requirement as part of that gate review to look at the RAID, and as well as the PID and any other documents. So on here, I'm going to just put that the steering committee has a responsibility. The project manager's got responsibilities in here. And you might want to break that task up into multiple tasks, such as submit documents for review, and that would be the responsibility of the project manager. Review the documents, that would be the responsibility of the steerco. Okay, creating the plan. I think you would consult everybody in your team about that. You might end up consulting your steerco. It's a good idea to consult users, and if you've got vendors at that point, then consult them as well. I think you would consult your whole team about requirements, and you'd consult the steerco. You would consult users, but you might only inform or consult vendors. Depends on the relationship. On this one, I'm going to put as well for the business analyst to be responsible, a shared responsibility with the project manager. I have, as project manager, from time to time, come across business analysts who don't want to gather requirements, and well, I don't know what to tell you. I'd rather stay at home as well, I suppose. Create design. Define solution. Depends on what you're doing. So I'm just going to be very vague on this, very general on this, and say that you're going to have your team consulted on all parts of that. And your steering committee is probably not going to be too interested. They'll be interested to know that you've done it, perhaps. Users won't care. Vendors will care if they're part of providing that design or that solution. So I'm going to put consult and inform for both of those. Now on this one, if we're going in a chronological order and we're just getting vendors involved at this point, then you would obviously be consulting vendors. As I say, this line might move around depending on the kind of project you're doing. I think that your steerco should be involved with that. End users probably not informed or consulted. Their representative on the steerco will be sufficiently informed and they can cascade information if needed, but I don't think the end users are really going to care too much at this stage. Engage vendors, you probably have the BA involved and the delivery team as well. That'd be involved, yeah. End of planning stage gate review. I think for this we can just copy and paste from the previous stage gate, and I'm going to copy that one to all the other stage gates as well. Build outputs. Now at this point you might want to share the responsibility with the delivery team. Test outputs, same again, assuming of course that your testers are part of the delivery team. There's a possibility you might have user testing going on, in which case you might pass some responsibility across to them as well. I'm going to go on the basis that our testers are in the delivery team, but it wouldn't be wrong of you to put a responsibility tag on users if you are using users from the business to do your testing. And again, that's why it's important to have these definitions up here, because these people probably aren't familiar with how projects work. So it's important that you're actually informing them exactly what it is that you expect from them. I'd say the business analyst would be consulted on both of these outputs. There are plenty of times when I've seen the business analyst take over to actually do testing as well, usually because if they worked on the requirements, they'd also have some insight onto whether those requirements are being met by the outputs. So it's useful to involve them in the testing process if you don't have dedicated testers available. I'm going to put that the steering committee would be consulted on both of those points. Actually, maybe on testing they'd just want to be informed. If things went wrong, they'd probably want to be consulted, but I think that's fine. I think vendors would be consulted on both. Okay, communicate the change. Project manager responsible. You might want to get feedback from the team on the communication itself. I would definitely recommend, before communicating to the whole business, that you get people on your steerco, maybe not as the steerco board itself, but key members of it, to have a look at the content and make sure it's suitable, especially the members who are on the side of the business. And the users will get informed. Maybe the vendors would be informed as well. Good idea to keep them in the loop. Train users. This isn't something that the business analyst will be involved in. Delivery team, if you've got trainers as part of the team, this is where they would actually take up some responsibility. Otherwise, they may just be informed that it is happening. Steering committee would be interested to know that training is taking place, but that's about it. And users, of course, would be having a bit of a two-way engagement on that, because they'd be giving feedback on the training if you're doing things the right way. And vendors would be informed. Go live decision. Okay, the business analyst would be consulted, as they would be contributing content into the packs and the evidence that you're ready to go. So would the delivery team. The sponsor would be accountable, but also I'm going to put them down as responsible. I'm going to say that the steering committee is responsible if they are the forum that you go to for your go live, which it should be. Project manager stays responsible because they're heavily involved throughout the whole part of that decision making. Users would be probably informed of the outcome from that, and vendors would be consulted. Okay, following the go live and no horrible disasters happening, we'd hand over to the BAU, and for that, I think there might be some, I don't think the BA would be too involved in that. Delivery team might be involved, they might be consulted as part of this. Steering committee would be informed it's taking place, and users would be consulted as a group. Vendors informed probably. Okay, that's the end of that stage. Project closure report. I think you would actually consult everybody in the team. You would also consult the steering committee. You probably would speak to the user's representative. In this case, as I say, they would be on the steering committee. Users would be consulted, but it would probably be whoever is representing users on the steering committee you would engage with. So I'm going to leave them as blank on this. Vendors could be consulted if you've got some useful inputs you want to get from them. Okay, I'm going to copy this whole line here for the closure report for the lessons learnt log, because it's pretty much the same. For open risks and issues, it's up to the project manager to get them all closed and or transferred, and if they're being transferred, they're going across to potentially to the users, so I'm going to put them as consulted. Release the team. I think you just need to inform them. And the steering committee should be informed as well. And then end of closure, stage gate review. And then your project's closed. A few points of debate on this. You might have noticed that I put the sponsor in the business side rather than the project team side. Now the sponsor kind of straddles that position, and the truth is though that if you look on any company hierarchies, they are usually an influential person within the business. They've got ownership, they've got accountabilities within the business itself, and that's the basis on which they're useful to us. There were a few times as well where, and you might have noticed I was kind of fudging a little bit between the users and the users representative on the steering committee. There might well be someone who's got a title like business owner that's on there that's not the sponsor, and it might well be worth putting a column for them on there, so there's a little bit of clarity then on that. You don't have this kind of fudging between these areas. I didn't include PMO or PSO on here, and it's not because I like to be invisible, it's just because the vast majority of projects probably don't have dedicated PMOs or PSOs on them, and if you do have one, then by all means put a column on there for that. As a separate entity, you might well have portfolio office or change division or any kind of variation of that, where essentially you've got like a centralized change organization, and you might want to put representatives of that team on there as well. Anyway, as a generic Raci for a generic project that I know nothing about, hopefully that was fine and useful to you. There might be parts you want to debate on that. By all means, put your thoughts in the comments, that's absolutely fine. But this is your document now, so you can change this however you like. Just make sure that everybody that is actually listed on here is informed that there's an expectation on them and that they sign up to it in some way. Finally, I'm bound to have forgotten something. What can I say? I'm doing this live without notes. So You know, if I've forgotten something, please feel free to shame me endlessly in the comments. I'll look forward to catching you next time. I hope this has been helpful to you. You take care.